Imagine a farmhouse lost in the middle of nowhere. A lonely structure that seems frozen in time, with boards nailed across its windows and an air of abandonment that makes your skin crawl. Around it, dark woods where the wind twists between the trees and swamps so silent they feel like they're hiding ancient secrets. For decades, the children of Plainfield, a small town in Wisconsin, would whisper stories about that house. They said it was haunted, that a strange man lived there, a man who collected human heads. Some swore they had seen shadows. Others claimed to hear strange noises on moonless nights. What seemed like nothing more than a local ghost story, a tale to scare little kids, actually hid a truth far more chilling than anyone could have imagined. Because inside that farmhouse, Ed Gein, a quiet, reclusive man, kept secrets that would freeze the blood of an entire nation. Today we're diving into the story of Gein, the man whose life inspired some of the most terrifying characters in cinema. A story that begins under the shadow of an oppressive mother and ends with a farmhouse turned into a museum of horrors. In the 1950s, Plainfield was a place where time seemed to stand still. A town of barely 680 residents, families working the land, hunters roaming the woods during season, a church at the heart of community life, and a handful of local shops where everyone knew each other. The town was so small that people could tell who was coming and going, what they bought at the hardware store, and which family every last name belonged to. In such a tight-knit community, it seemed impossible that someone could hide a terrible secret. And yet, among them lived Ed Gein. To most, he was odd but harmless. Quiet, shy, socially awkward, but always willing to lend a hand. He looked after kids when parents needed help, fixed things around the house, and greeted neighbors with a timid smile. He was the kind of neighbor no one paid much attention to. No one could have guessed that behind the mask of a lonely farmer was a mind completely fractured. To understand Gein, we have to look at his childhood. He was born in 1906 into a family marked by violence, alcohol, and strict religious control. His mother, Augusta, ruled the household, a stern, deeply religious woman obsessed with sin and convinced the world was corrupt. To her, all women except herself were immoral, instruments of downfall. She forbade her children from having friends, cut off nearly all contact with the outside world, and raised them under constant fear. Ed grew up listening to daily sermons about sin, punishment, and the dangers of human desire. His father was distant, indifferent, and heavy drinking, while his older brother Henry rebelled and tried to escape his mother's grip. But Ed didn't. He stayed under her shadow, obedient and devoted, unable to imagine life beyond the walls of that farmhouse. Tragedy struck in 1940 when his father passed away. Soon after, Henry died in a mysterious fire out in the fields, and many suspected Ed might have been involved. Nothing was ever proven. What was certain was that with Henry gone, Ed was left alone with Augusta, and his dependence on her grew even stronger. When Augusta died in 1945, Ed was left adrift. The only guiding voice in his life disappeared, and with it the fragile balance of his mind collapsed. Isolation consumed him, and little by little his reality twisted into a living nightmare. The first sign that something sinister was happening in Plainfield came in December 1954. Mary Hogan, a strong-willed woman who owned a local tavern, vanished without a trace. Police found the place empty, with signs of violence but no body. Rumors spread. Some said Mary had ties to organized crime. Others thought she ran away. But no one suspected Ed. 3 years later, on November 16, 1957, the mystery returned. Bernice Warden, owner of the local hardware store and a respected woman in town, disappeared during her workday. Her son, who worked as a deputy, walked into the shop and found disturbing signs. Dark stains on the floor and the cash register ripped out of place. In the sales book, the last name written was clear: Ed Gein. Officers headed straight to his farm, expecting to find stolen goods that tied him to the disappearance. What they discovered instead went far beyond imagination. In Gein's barn, they found Bernice's body. The scene was so shocking that some officers had to step outside for air. But that was only the beginning. Inside the house, they walked into what looked like a nightmare museum, a grotesque mix of junkyard and shrine. There were skulls turned into bowls, masks made from human skin, chairs and lampshades covered in flesh. Everyday objects transformed into grisly relics, as if each piece belonged to some twisted collection dedicated to horror itself. And hanging on the wall was the face of Mary Hogan, missing for 3 years. The officers realized they weren't dealing with just a murderer. They had uncovered someone who had crossed every imaginable boundary. After his arrest, Ed confessed not only to taking the lives of Bernice and Mary, but also to digging up graves under the cover of night. He admitted he collected remains to build a full suit that would let him become a woman. Not just any woman, his mother. He wanted to bring her back, to feel her presence again by wearing a disguise made of human skin. It was devotion and resentment tangled together, a disturbing testament to how much Augusta's shadow shaped every part of his life. Although rumors spoke of dozens of victims, only the cases of Bernice Warden and Mary Hogan were ever confirmed. The rest remained in the realm of myth. When the news broke, Plainfield was changed forever. Newspapers exploded with headlines, radios broadcasted every detail, and journalists swarmed the once quiet town. What had been a sleepy farming community became the epicenter of national horror. Gein's farmhouse became an attraction in itself. Crowds of curious onlookers came to see the House of Horrors with their own eyes. Auctions were held for his belongings, and even the truck he used to haul bodies was turned into a carnival sideshow. The name Plainfield was no longer linked with quiet farmland. It was now synonymous with nightmare. In 1958, Ed Gein was declared mentally unfit to stand trial. He was sent to a psychiatric institution where he lived out the rest of his days. There he became an enigma, described by some as calm, almost childlike, and seemingly unable to grasp the weight of his crimes. Decades passed and Gein grew old in that hospital. He died in 1984 at the age of 77. He was buried in the very same cemetery from which he had stolen so many remains, right beside his mother, as if fate itself had bound him to her forever. But Gein's story didn't end with his death. In many ways, it was just beginning. His life and crimes became the inspiration for some of the most iconic horror characters in cinema. Norman Bates in Psycho, Leatherface in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Buffalo Bill in The Silence of the Lambs. Each of them carries a piece of the nightmare that began on that Plainfield farm. Gein's legacy went beyond crime reports, embedding itself deep into pop culture. His name became a symbol of how far the human mind can descend when consumed by isolation, obsession, and repression. Today, Gein's farmhouse no longer stands. It was destroyed decades ago, but its shadow lingers. Every time a horror film inspired by his story plays, every time his name is spoken, that farmhouse rises again in our collective imagination. Wrapped in fog, a reminder that true horror doesn't always come from fiction, but from reality itself. The story of Ed Gein is not just about a killer. It's the portrait of a mind broken by isolation, crushed under the weight of an oppressive mother, and consumed by an obsession that turned him into a dark legend.
The return of the name of Ed Gein means return of memories.
Gein has been going to graves and digging up, excavating bodies.
Ed Gein, one of the world's most evil killers.
And now I ask you, do you think Ed was simply the product of a diseased mind, or was he the inevitable result of a childhood ruled by fear and the iron hand of a mother who sealed his fate from the very beginning? Your opinion matters. Leave it in the comments. Sometimes the audience writes the best part of the story.